writers, and young because their debuts are out, but not because they are new to this pen. And it's a conversation about their new books, about their tours in the age of Rona, and everything in between. The two authors we're going to speak with tonight are Megan Giddings, who's author of Lakewood, and first we're going to speak with Jeni McFarland, whose book, House of Deep Water, is gorgeous. Not just the cover, but the way that she unfolds these stories. A couple of things that have already been said about this book. Just like life, McFarland's debut is big, messy, and complicated, while also being a completely engrossing portrait of her characters and their hometown. She deftly weaves in issues of race and consent, perfect for those who like books about family dysfunction. And I don't know if you get any more real about a story than story about family. So we're going to invite Jeni to the stage. Jeni McFarland holds an MFA in fiction from the University of Houston, where she is a fiction editor at Gulf Coast Magazine. She's an alum of Tin House, a 2016 Kimbilio Fellow, and has had short fiction published in Crack the Spine, Forge, and Spry, which nominated her for the storySouth Million Writers Award. She is also a finalist for the 2015 Gertrude Stein Writers Award in Fiction from the Dr. and T.J. Eckleburg Review. She has lived in Michigan and the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband and two cats. The House of Deep Water is her first book. Welcome to our space. Jeni, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
You know what? I am well. It's we were talking earlier today about the other day about it's good to be on this side of what in the world is going on. So we was able to crack the window today to fall in some really great conversation with some really clever folks. So I would say today's doing pretty well. So you were sharing one that has kept you going is starter dough.
Yeah. It's whenever I can find bread flour, at least. My grocery stores have been out lately, but yeah, I've been working on a good sourdough starter. I've named her Diva because she's very persnickety and likes to overflow from her jar. But yeah, the starter is active and happy, robust.
One of the things you described in even starting to spend some of this time baking bread was having to entertain yourself. And we'll talk a little bit about the internet, but I was curious to know, is that a new thing you drew from? So for example, people who are only children, this is entertaining themselves isn't new. People who I've talked with folks who are formerly incarcerated, folks who are introverts, and entertaining themselves is something they already draw from. So did you have that in your bag already, or did this force you to learn how to entertain yourself?
I had it in the bag already. I'm definitely an introvert, but I don't know, it's more so now. My husband's working from home and we live in the country in Michigan, so our internet's not great. So I can't use the internet during the day. I've had to find other ways to entertain myself.
Only child?
Not an only child. I have an older brother.
You were the creative kid, or were both of you the creative kids?
We're both creative. And I think he was maybe a little more creative than me in some ways when we were younger. Like he wrote a piece that our band performed, like our high school band performed when he was in high school. And yeah.
One of the things you mentioned in being based in rural Michigan, is the rural life what you're familiar with, or is that new?
That is very new for me. I grew up in like a small town when I was a kid, but we actually live like outside of the town limits now. And like I'm looking out my window at the moment and there are deer in my back acreage looking in the window at me. So it's interesting. It's very peaceful, very quiet. Social distancing is super easy out here, but it's definitely new for me.
What are you still adjusting? Before I ask how you've adjusted.
I am about as adjusted as I will be. Right now, I've made it through a Michigan winter in the country. I only got stuck in my driveway in the snow once. But yeah, I've just, I don't know, gotten used to. I think it's easier too, though, right now while everybody is at home, because being in the country and being distant from all of the events that you want to go to is hard. But right now, that's not an issue.
Most true. I was curious about your just how that adjustment and that take on I'll say there are two worlds. It's definitely everything is new if you haven't lived there before. But I've been in just watching discussions, these not new, but renewed conversations about the relationship between rural and rural living, especially in this climate. It's more than just nature. It's more than just suburbs. It's a conversation about lifestyle and how we can learn more from each other and not have it be such a hard line between rural and urban. So that's something that was already in my mind. So that was your new experience and being fairly new to being rural life. I was just curious if that was anything that you've thought about or experienced.
Between the two? Is that what you're asking? Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really sure. I guess I was always very much an introvert, so I didn't get out much even when we lived in the suburbs and in the city. So I'm not really sure how different it is for me at any rate.
Okay, fair. In the space of Rona time, being able to be in these spaces and not have that regular social interaction is something everyone's getting used to. And there's a particular weight when when you're also managing mental wellness. I mean, we're all managing mental wellness, but before these closed walls, we have some neighbors that are having additional stresses. And we were talking a bit about just not being able to talk about the presence and the reality of mental health. Even when it's a mental illness, it's a conversation of health. And if we can't talk about it, we can't talk about it. So imagine before the days, imagine especially now. So what would be some of the things that you've thought about and something you brought up that you think about often? How do we open this discussion? Will this experience open the discussion for us, do you think, about mental health?
I think it's starting to. I think there are a lot more people who are struggling right now, and we're struggling together. I've seen a lot more people on social media talking about self-care and talking about just feeling like you don't have a lot of energy right now and being gentle with yourself, which as someone who lives with depression, like this is life all the time. So I think it is beginning to open up some of these conversations in a really kind of nice way that is long overdue.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, or how do you think we can even broaden that discussion specifically with Black families? I also have written narratives where it's introducing that conversation as a conversation is difficult for us to have, for stigma, for history, for the idea of praying it away. And you want to say, are we still having this challenge of openly talking about mental health? And we are still having this challenge. So what do you think would broaden that specifically with our cousins?
Yeah, I think just having the conversations now, just beginning to start them, and it's going to be awkward at first. It's always awkward when you first start talking about something that is new to you or that you're not used to talking about, but just kind of pushing through that awkwardness is the first step, I think. I hope, because that's the step I'm at. I'm hoping to, move beyond this at some point and it won't feel so awkward.
Most excellent. I would love to start to move towards hearing some of your pages. And we're going to come back to I believe, some incredible advice. And we'll save that for the end. But particularly this idea of coming home. right? You leave a hometown with a certain idea of who you are, and then you go out there and you try the world on for size. And for all kinds of reasons, we return back home. So that's what this novel is about. It's about coming home. It's about a reckoning. It's about overturning the stones of secrets. And I would love for you to please talk a bit about what you love about this story.
Yeah, it's a story that's very dear to me, especially having recently moved back to Michigan after I've been away for a while, and getting reacquainted with the customs around here. It's just a little bit different from places I've lived elsewhere. But I don't know, I love the idea that, as I'm thinking back to when I was 18 or so, and I just couldn't wait to get out of the town that I grew up in, which is kind of similar to the town that I wrote about in my novel, and thinking like, this is it, I'm going to go out in the world and I'm going to do all these things and I'm never coming back. And then, and then I don't know, you get a little older and you get nostalgic for certain aspects of the life that you knew. Or for me, it was, I would see people talking online from like the people I went to high school with, and they would post things like, you know, have you seen my son? I haven't heard from him all day. He isn't responding to text messages. You see him send them home. And then just like, I was living in Houston at the time and thinking about like living in a place that was small enough that you could put that there. Would be like, yeah, I know your son is, sounded close to me. And I don't know, like maybe in some ways a little too, like, because then everybody also knows all your business. But I don't know, there's just something about smaller town life that really appealed to me when I got older, and did not appeal to me when I was younger.
Yeah, I think that's like a lot of things that you don't appreciate the flavors of. I'm thinking right now, I don't think I I didn't like jazz because it didn't have any words in it. And I had a friend point out, you don't really appreciate, oh, he still likes fruity candy. Huh. So you do grow into this palette and the idea of close-knit small space. I remember going back to visiting with a friend of mine and just thought, don't you feel claustrophobic with all these folks and everyone knows and is in the same high, everyone's wearing the high school jersey. And he goes, no, I love knowing that I'm 2 degrees from anything that I need. And only with maturity, I'll give it maturity, have I come to appreciate that as well. So I'm going to ask a bit from on the writer part of you with this story. What were you mindful of, or what was a challenge in maybe in one of the characters, or something you were mindful about in setting the world?
One thing I was hyper mindful about was, writing about sexual trauma. I didn't want it to be gratuitous in any way. I didn't want it to come across as, I don't know, like, I didn't want it to seem like I was also saying like, this is how everyone's trauma looks. I've had people kind of come at me who had experts gathered that their trauma didn't look like my main character's trauma. And I don't want that to seem like, everybody who deals with trauma deals with it in this way. I also don't want everyone to think that, everyone who deals with depression deals with it in the way that my main character does. Like, these are things that are very individual and personalized. And, all I can do is show one character or, a chorus of characters, a community of characters, and how they deal with life. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's what everybody experiences.
Oh, that's true. And I love that ownership of all I can do is show, because these are pictures in our minds, right? I can just show this community as I see it, and the conversation goes from there. If you would please share an excerpt from your book.
Yeah, love to. So this is a little ways into the book, and all that I really need to tell you is that Beth, who's one of my main characters, is returning back to the small town of Riverbend with her 2 kids, and it's moving back in with her father, and she's half Black, her father's white. I think that's all you need to know at this point. Oh, you also need to know you found out that Beth has been sexually assaulted by their neighbor, Gilmer, who has been arrested. The potholes on Main Street are like trenches she has to pull the car over, and most of the storefronts downtown are boarded up. Riverbend was never a booming place, but now it's just the skeleton of a town. As she pulls into the alley behind her father's house, the trees and garages lean close, bearing down on her. Beth finds herself taking great gulps of air and is glad her kids are both asleep, that she can have a moment to pull herself together after parking her car. The house has blurred in her mind over the years. In the darkness, it seems to have grown larger. She knows it's painted pale yellow, but for the life of her, she now has trouble making it out against the sky. There is no moon out tonight. The alley behind her is dark, the street lamp burnt out. She stares at her father's house, trying to discern the pitch of the roof, the stairs leading up the back door, anything. She should be able to find a happy memory of it. This is the house where she spent her early childhood, the house where they lived when her family was still whole. And yet, even as she strains her mind, all she can come up with are memories of Gilmer Thurber here, in this house, his presence in every corner, filling the house like dark water. The longer she stares, the harder it is to see, so that she finds herself turning away, giving the house the side eye, trying to trick it into materializing. Next to her, Dan snores quietly. Jeanette shifts in her sleep and gives an unhappy whisper. Beth knows the house stands there, yet the lot seems to be full of stars in space, with distant planets dotting the wall facing her. The Milky Way is folded into the roof. Her eyes are sore and dry. She finds herself dozing, her head drooping onto her chest, and then her eyes blink open. She could close them just for a second, if only her mind would quiet. Instead, she stares at the house until its eastern-facing wall grows pale, until the sky around blues and brightens. At first, she thinks it's just a trick of the light, but as the dawn comes on stronger, the house turns blue and stays blue. It's been painted recently, she realizes. It's only the third week in September, and the mulberry tree in the backyard is a sunny yellow, its leaves dropping into the grass. A light goes on inside the kitchen, and she can see her father, Ernest DeWitt, through the gauzy curtains, poking around the fridge, the pantry, making coffee. At the sink, he pauses, tilts his head, then reaches out a hand and pushes the curtain aside. "Wake up," Beth says quietly, and when Dan stirs next to her, she adds, "We're here." She has to tell herself, get out of the car, go inside the house. She shakes her head. Dan wakes his sister, and Jeanette comes briefly to life in that moment when her body is awake, but her brain has yet to boot up. "It's morning," Jeanette says. "I slept in a car all night." She seems proud of this fact. Like it's the kind of bohemian lifestyle she's always longed for. And even as her kids are opening doors and stretching in the new sun, even as Beth's father greets his grandchildren for the first time since they were little, Beth has to keep telling herself, get out of the car. Jeanette walks right up to Ernest DeWitt and hugs him, and something inside Beth stirs violently. She spills out of the driver's seat and into the driveway. "Eliza," her father says, and just hearing her childhood name makes her bowels turn to ice. He has his arms held open to her. She doesn't want to forgive him so easily. She doesn't want to hug him, doesn't want to be here. Yet here she is, standing numb and tired in the driveway as the smile he wears grows strained around the eyes. His face sags at the jowls, his glasses are crooked on his nose, and she finds herself staring at him. She'd forgotten the details of his face, and she wonders briefly whether he really is her father. They look nothing alike, and not just because he's white. The round, upturned nose, too small for his face, and the fleshy jaw. His arms, those strong tan arms, so heavy, they droop, and Beth inserts herself into them to prop them up. "It's good to see you," he says, and kisses her forehead. "When did you get in? I was waiting, but I fell asleep on the couch." "You painted the house," is all Beth can say. "It was Linda's idea," he says, and turns as the back door claps shut. There, standing on the stoop, is a girl Beth recognizes immediately. Dirty blonde hair, a little too much makeup smudged from sleep. Linda Williams. When she was in high school, Beth used to babysit the Williams girls. Linda would have been about 10, old enough to stay home alone, really, except their mother seemed keen to foist the girls off on anyone else. Beth wonders what her father is doing with this child, but it occurs to her that, as creepy as it is, their relationship makes kind of sense. There's something with the child in Ernest's gaze, something that feels like a game of hide and seek. When you look into his eyes, you might catch a glimpse of a shoe or pigtail disappearing around a corner, but when you follow it, it's gone. Speaking with Ernest, it's easy to lose all track of the present. You're so focused on seeking out the child, hiding. This wouldn't be noteworthy in a man of 20-something. You could pass him off as a late bloomer, but Ernest is in his early 60s, and so the game of hide and seek will forever catch Beth off guard. Beth has always hated this about her father. She has only ever wanted him to grow the F up. I don't know if I can swear on here. I'll just say grow the F up. A bit of a hypocrisy, really, given that she too has a child inside her, that she felt the child stirring, shifting in sleep, and her father called her Eliza. Her anger at her father is in part anger at her own inner child, whom Beth can't seem to shake. "When I see you again," Linda says, sidling up next to Ernest, and sitting herself between father and daughter. Beth remembers Linda as a horse girl who always smelled of hay and manure. Now her hair is unusually full and glossy, and her fingernails are too long for a farm girl's. None of this is to be overlooked. Even so, Linda stands with her hands on her belly, still flat like a 20-something's. Beth notes Linda's rosy cheeks, her pudgy face. She closes her eyes. Her father has put a child in this child. That's all.
Woo! I know it's hard. You want to imagine the applause, so I'm going to imagine me times 100. Thank you for that. And we actually have some folks who have chimed in with their questions, and I would definitely want to have them on board. What was the hardest part of writing this book, and where did you get your motivation from?
The hardest part was really, there's a fair amount that I kind of mined my personal past in order to write. And so just kind of addressing things that I was not willing to address for a long time was difficult. My motivation was, I don't know, I just couldn't stop writing it. Like I loved these characters. I wanted to see what they would do next. I don't know. I wanted to see if they'd be okay.
And and okay gets to be relative. Okay gets to be relative.
Yes.
A lot of us have great ideas, but eventually give up on them. When did it hit you that giving up was no longer an option in writing this book?
It was never an option in writing it. In getting it published, there were times that I wanted to give up, but in writing it, I don't know, it was like an obsession. I couldn't stop.
We appreciate that. And who are some of your favorite authors?
So I will say that I read recently, my mind is going blank, Love War Stories by Ivelisse Rodriguez, and that was an amazing book. I also recently read American Marriage by Tayari Jones, which was also amazing. It was roughly about a Black man who's wrongfully incarcerated, and then just the strain that puts in his marriage. It was an amazing book. And then I'm looking over at my bookshelf here. I love me some Margaret Atwood. I
love you referencing like a homegirl.
I don't know. Sorry.
No worries. Where are some of the next digital spaces where people can find you, follow you? And do you have any other digital readings that are coming up?
I do. I have a reading tomorrow night with Brazos Bookstore, and it is going to be on Instagram Live, which I still don't know how to access, so I should probably work on that tomorrow. But then, and I have a radio interview on Saturday with Doc Radio.
And in terms of, for people that want to be able to follow not just this piece, but your exploding career, and congratulations on this debut book. You mentioned that all of your social media handles and connections can be found right there on your website, JeniMcFarland.com. And we are inviting everyone, as you're going to go out and get this book. I mean, not go out, but like go to your living room and hit the laptop and order it that way. That kind of going out. Please consider shopping local, even if you are not in Milwaukee. I promise you, Amazon is going to be just fine. But if we can do what we can to continue to support businesses that you could potentially drive by and see the folks in your local coffee shop, So pretend that Boswell is a bookstore in your town and support them, and definitely pick up this title. Jeni, thank you for taking time out for having this conversation. And to the question about not giving up, thank you for knowing that that wasn't an option, and for having these conversations.
Yeah.
Before we invite Megan to the screen, I said I was going to save this little bit of wisdom, sage advice for the end. Your character thought things were one way in your youth and has a different appreciation. You said once upon a time, and I read this and I so agreed. Once upon a time, we thought we had to always wear sexy panties. And then,
Yes.
what did we learn? Give it to the
And
people.
then we grew up.
Give it to the people. What did we learn?
So this is my gospel for right now is boy shorts, because there is nothing sexy about underwear that falls down and rides up at the same time. Don't go with the thongs. Don't go with the bikinis. Go with boy shorts always.
That was so close to my heart. I have had this conversation, I'm saying, in recent times. Like, you know what? Why was I trained to turn up my nose at comfortable underwear? Oh, that's right, because in your 20s, everything has to be sexy. So please still do that in your 20s and beyond, however long it's sexy and comfortable for you. But that is wonderful advice to go straight to our first layer of comfort. So I appreciate you for that. And I wish you the best with this book and all the other books that are coming from here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So our next guest making their way to the screen is Megan Giddings. And before we bring her to the screen, I would like to take a moment to thank Boswell Book Company for being a partner in this series. Initially, it was finding a way to have conversations with authors all over the city, and not having to be connected to a bookstore or our venue, but really finding ways to engage with authors and writers and the stories they tell and why they tell them. And in that, we have the Wisconsin Writers Association, who also is encouraging writers like Johnny, who, I'm pointing you specifically, sir, to not give up. So sometimes we just need a community of folks who are also thinking about not finishing, and we all know that we're made to do this. So thank you for those partners, and of course for the Retreat MKE, a venue in Bronzeville, Milwaukee, and translating that open space to a digital space. So we're excited that all of these things came together in the middle of these strange times. But we would have missed these authors on their visit before, and the Rona made a couple of things possible. She's making life difficult, but she also made it possible for us to still introduce everyone to these new titles. So our next writer that's going to make their way to us, make sure I picked out my favorite pieces. Like Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale or Iron Levin's The Stepford Wives, Lakewood compels even as it unsettles. Megan Giddings writes with a scalpel, and I'd follow her characters anywhere, and I'd be right behind him. Our author, Megan Giddings, is a features editor at The Rumpus, a channel of the Los Angeles Review of Books, and a contributing editor at Boulevard. She is a recipient of the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund Grant for Feminist Fiction. Her short stories have been published in Black Warrior Review, Gulf Coast, and Iowa Review. Megan holds degrees from the University of Michigan and Indiana University. She lives in Michigan. Bring her to the stage. Hello.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
You know, I'm doing well. So this is always, having a great conversation is invigorating. Close with whiskey and turtle sundaes, but that's maybe a different thing for a different day, a different thing. So speaking of snacks and goodies, one of the things that you mentioned, going right into how we're all getting through this, I'd love for you to talk a little bit of how you've been getting through it through food.
Yeah.
To cook.
I mean, some of it is, I've been doing this thing where I've started to make all the food that my parents made for me when I was a kid. And my parents were really strict. They had like one rule for all. I have 3 other siblings. Mm-hmm. And the rule was we all learned how to cook. And my dad used to say, when you're an adult, I can't come to your house and you just feed me a hot dog. You got to cook for me.
Now that's a daddy play. This is yes, mm-hmm. in your survival, but about when I come to visit, which
And I mean, he was a good cook too. It wasn't like he couldn't cook when he was saying that. But so now I'm making things and I keep texting him like, well, what is this? And then he told me like almost all of us now are texting him and being like, give me this recipe, give me this recipe, give me this recipe.
Oh my goodness. What's one that you what's one you were excited to get and make so far?
Last week I made a soup that he used to make me when I would be really sick as a kid. And I just needed that reassurance. And it just smelled so good through the house. It made me feel it was just much more even.
Oh, what is the distance? Is he far from you?
Yeah, he's far. I'm actually in Indiana at the moment adjuncting. So my family, they're all still back up in Michigan. So I'm about 5 hours and they're all about an hour or so away from each other, but I'm here.
Oh man, I bet he is chest swollen a bit that he's getting these text messages about these dishes. And don't let it have been a dish that you swore you didn't like and now you're coming for a recipe. One of the siblings is getting that story.
I mean, almost everybody wants his like rib recipe that he won't give out anyway or stuff like that.
That's in the will. That one's in the will.
Oh yeah.
So you mentioned that you are adjuncting. What courses?
I help co-teach 2 courses right now in American Studies, and one is called the American School, and the other is about diversity and inequity in higher education, and it's an intensive writing class.
Whoa! And the inequities in education is a writing class. So who's in the classroom?
It's a class that's an upper level writing class. So technically any student who wants to take this credit and wants to focus on learning more about diversity and inequity is in this classroom. And the majority of students, they're not writing majors in it. They're mostly students who they need to learn how to write.
Sure.
But they also felt like they needed to learn how to have an actual conversation about diversity and inequity. And that's what drew them to the classroom.
What a great idea. And I mean, in terms of a framing, so whether you're coming as a writing craft or not, that definitely is going to help you shape how you think through, maybe not about, but definitely through the conversation, because you have to do that to get it from your loose thoughts to something coherent on the page. How has the response been?
Mostly good. It's a really challenging class even before all this, like the Rona.
I call her by her name, Rona.
Yeah, we're close. But it's really laid out how unequal a lot of things in this country are. And I think in some ways it's made the class easier in the readings because you can see it everywhere. And especially if you're someone who's been really sheltered, I think this kind of opens your eyes a little more to, oh, wait, things aren't just fair for everybody. It's not just this anything can happen for you society. It's so much more difficult than I think most people are allowed to see and also let themselves see. I mean, and in general, they're really good about talking about the harder issues. The hardest issue for everybody, of course, to talk about was money, because we've been taught forever talking about money is rude. It doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor. You on either side of the spectrum, you hide it and you just don't have a real honest conversation.
And that becomes a root of so many other, maybe dishonest isn't fair, but definitely disingenuous conversation. But you think you're talking, you think you're having these real discussions and solving problems, but we've been taught, to your point, to keep a lot of really important facts and information tucked away out of etiquette. And it is inviting them to think of a different way to be. And it may have been more on the mechanics of their writing, but I wonder what the topic, the conversation you're guiding them through. One of the things you said you're really focused on is working with your students with revisions. So one on the writer end of things, everyone doesn't love the editing process, but with what you're talking about, it's also revising how they understand themselves, how they understand all of us to be.
Yeah, I loved how you put that. I think so much of our lives is learning how to revise ourselves and move forward and keep pushing. And I think, wow, oh, I love that so much. It just made me feel so good about aging.
I call it seasoning, but technically that too. And a lot of it is, I would tie it to the idea of aging, seasoning, maturing, whatever word helps you sleep.
Yeah.
Because before it was, you need to put these things in place to get to this point, this age or this status, or you're creating, and you put so much energy in creating this understanding, and now you want me to revise it after all of those. I have young people I work with, and I call them my sugar babies. And once they get on this side of high school and college, I'll say, I know we totally oversold adulthood. We totally oversold it. But how do you have to, until you learn, you have to revise it. So we couldn't tell you when you were young that you're going to have to revise what we're telling you to build right now.
Exactly.
How have you revised you? Not all of it, but just if you think about it now, what's one thing you've given yourself permission to revise?
I think a lot of the point of views I've had throughout my life, I keep revising. And I think one of the biggest pleasures for me of I'm in my 30s now, it's thinking about the number of times I've kind of failed idealistically or been really rigid or stubborn, and then kept pushing myself to change and to be more generous with other people or vulnerable. And I think it's really hard sometimes in your 20s, and especially as a teenager, to be open and vulnerable with people, because the world is really hard and you're growing and building yourself, like you said, and also you're learning independence. And then you kind of learn independence, and then you have to learn how to let people back in and how to stick to your ideals, but still be kind and willing to make connections with other people.
Listening to, I kind of followed it like this narrative. You can't skip the steps though, right? You're fierce about that. You're fierce about that protection. You just can't. As much as we want to, all of us want to end on the other side and just have it all together, but you have to go through those stubborn stages to be able to bend a little bit.
In the fall, I taught creative writing with Ross Gay, and it was a wonderful experience. Yeah. He talked so much about how to become a good writer, you have to learn vulnerability, you have to learn kindness. And it was kind of this thing where I knew that for me, on one side of it, I was like, yes, exactly. But he was also talking to a lecture room of like 118-year-olds. And I could see so many of them where it was almost like frightening to hear a grown man talk about like opening your heart so that you can play, so that you can have fun again, so you can build this world for yourself. And I just keep thinking about that first day, because it was both like so opening and magical for me as an adult to hear someone say, you know what, you still do need to play. And then to look around and see kind of the fear of like, for 18 years, you've been told really rigidly, I'm training you to be an adult. I'm training you to be a good student. And then on your first day of college, here comes your professor in overalls and an Air Jordan t-shirt. And he's like,
not in the brochure.
Yep. Just let it out. Enjoy.
Oh, and that road to getting into those lecture seats, there are a lot of things that could prepare young people where that wouldn't have to be such a surprise. It's part of your educational experience,
Yeah.
What would be some things, because we've also had a chance to poke around a bit about how students are prepared, the inequities of how students have access to being prepared, but it's in general. How would you reimagine education to get kids ready for, let's air quotes call it college for now, but how would you reimagine education in general?
I mean, in general, I would untie education to zip code wealth. as long as public education relies on how much money you have or how much money the people around you have, and that determines so many of your resources in this country, it shapes the very way you think and are allowed to learn how to think. If you're in a school district that has a lot of money and can afford the arts, it can afford to get you someone who will pay attention if you have, and it's not even afford to pay attention, it's you have a small enough classroom that your teacher can actually be engaged with you. And it's such a different experience if you have access to teachers who will shape the way that they learn for you. You have up-to-date books. It's so unfair to come in and have so many advantages just because of wealth. I'm trying really hard not to get mad because it does really upset me. It's one of the things that we could do so well in 2020. Well, theoretically, because I have no idea what we could actually do well when I say that out loud. But it is making sure that we have a well-educated populace, that we learn how to think, that we develop a culture where people are celebrated for questioning and thinking and considering different opinions. And because of the way education is, we don't have the room to pay teachers so that they can actually educate instead of train at times. We have so much focus on testing, but testing doesn't matter. I can't say it doesn't matter because the way things are
benchmark.
But it does push away the students who have different types of intelligences. An A doesn't mean you're smart. An A means you know how to do school. It means
really well and really intensely sometimes.
Yeah, you know how to please a teacher and you know how to live in the system, but there are so many people I know who are so smart and so creative and so interesting, and school just destroys them because they're just not that kind of person.
And all of this imagining forward that whether we choose to or not, everything's going to be new. So some of this Rona's silver lining, perhaps, if we want to call it that. What's one thing that you hope pulls through from what you've seen with education and imagining a new forward of how kids are taught, how we learn? What could come from this?
I think that there could be more generosity in education. Like there are more reports of people thinking more about their students' mental health. They're trying to disrupt the systems of competition in schooling. And I think we could take that forward. I don't think schools should be such a huge amount of stress like it is upon a lot of kids now.
I was sharing with a young father and said, well, keep in mind, when you do the cookies, math, that's storytelling and those type of things and stuff that we know, but because we've been conditioned to drop them off at a place and expect magic to happen between lunch period, the parents being more engaged and able to remind ourselves that we've always been the first teachers, and because we have to work it into our full day. So I like that language though, in terms of idea of having more generosity in education, because it's going to be a better space for everybody. But at this point, I would love to have you share a little bit from this incredible book.
So this is Lakewood. It came out on March 24th, the day after my governor ordered the shelter-in-place order for Indiana.
Of course.
So those things are always going to be tied a little together for me forever now.
It's always going to be a part of this story. Well, this I would call a tale of predatory science. It's about economics, it's about race, it's about medical experiments, and it is about the cost of human lives and bodies, particularly bodies wrapped in melanin. And what an interesting time that is fictional and not. So Megan, if you could please tell us a little bit, share with us some of this, an excerpt, and we'll talk a bit about the piece.
Cool. I'm going to read just a little bit from chapter 2. And all you have to know, if you haven't read the book, is that in chapter 1, Lena finds out, I don't know why I checked my book as if I did not know what happened in it. Sorry about that. What a weird day.
I love it.
So on page 1, you find out that Lena's grandmother, who has essentially raised her, has died. And her mother is still alive, but her mother has several chronic illnesses. So Lena, essentially at 21, she becomes the breadwinner for her family. She has to take care of everything. And this is her trying to figure out what to do. Chapter 2. The letter arrived in the mail on the day of Lena's third job interview, an invitation to participate in a series of research studies about mind, memory, personality, and perception. The Lakewood Project. It offered Lena and her family health insurance if she was selected to be a participant, also housing and a weekly stipend for qualified applicants. It was addressed specifically to her, Miss Lena Johnson. A signature at the bottom that she couldn't read, an 800 number to call to schedule an appointment. There was something about it, the lack of details, the thick, expensive paper, maybe just the whole vibe, that made her uncomfortable. Lena showed the letter to Tanya. Is this a scam? Tanya held the letter up to the light, asked to see the envelope it came in. I don't know. I'm not. She scrunched her nose. What's the word for someone who can tell if things are forged? I think they're called. Lena took the letter back. Forensic document experts. It's probably legit. Didn't Stacy tell his brother, like, he did these, right? I can't remember. I zone out most of the time when he talks about his brother. Well, he'll be at the party tonight. You can ask him. No one's brother is as great as Stacy says his brother is. Tanya pulled out a dress. What I'm wearing now with a leather jacket or this? Lena looked down at the letter again. If you are selected for this study, you will be well compensated. You are going to come out tonight, right? Lena kept her eyes on the letter. She knew if she looked up, her friend's eyes would be let me take care of you soft. She would offer to put on an episode of The Office, point to the drawer where their vodka was hidden, start talking about doing face and hair masks. Yeah, we're going out. And yeah, that's what you're wearing now with the leather jacket. You don't want to look like you're trying too hard. You know what I think? Almost all the time, Lena said, while folding the letter. I think you should call, Tanya said. Lena was still wearing the pantsuit Tanya liked to call, Your Honor, I plead not guilty. Do you think I should wear this to the party? You need a backup plan. Lena watched as Tanya held the red dress up again against her body. The room stunk of the black pepper and honeysuckle candles they liked to burn to relax, and to hide the smell of Tanya's cucumber-scented vaping. During a research study, it didn't sound any worse than the Craigslist ad she'd just been looking at. A secretary position for a notoriously terrible cable company. Openings at a new, innovative maid service, where you'd dress as a French maid and say your name was Simone at every house you cleaned. I'll call in the morning, Lena said. I'm just going to stop there.
The roaring applause going on. Oh, I want to. So many questions I want to ask about this story.
Mm-hmm.
What do you love most about what this story does?
It's kind of a complicated question for me because I wrote a lot of Lakewood out of being angry about a lot of things. So, like, one of the smallest kernels of it is just, I will start over for a second.
Mm-hmm.
One of the smallest kernels of it is that I had a family member who was misdiagnosed with a health issue. And it cost us all our savings to find out actually he was fine. And it made me think a lot about our insurance system. But while we were dealing with everything, we kept wondering, like, how would we pay for this? How would we keep you alive? And it's a question that it's so ingrained in American life now because of the way our insurance is not affordable. Our healthcare system is terrible. And so some of the roots of the story is just thinking about that feeling and processing it. And so it's sometimes hard for me to say I love this book I wrote. Like, I love having written it. I love that so many people believed in it. But I also still it's really hard to process it still because I was so mad about so many things.
Hmm.
I mean, the book is about racism and inequities. It's got this emotional root, and it kind of just kept coming out in all these negative emotions.
And looking at the story as a whole now, are you still attached to the emotion that made the story, that started the stories, or?
I thought I wouldn't be, and then Rona came. And I mean,
something else.
Yeah, but it made something that I think for a lot of people reading my book, it would have been subtext. And it's turned it into text, thinking about the American healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
And before we started talking about COVID-19 readily, it was a lot more talks about race. Almost everybody wanted to talk more because it's been compared to Get Out. A lot more people want to address the issues of race in the book, and those are definitely there. But the closer we got to it, the more the conversation started to shift to be like, oh, this isn't just about race. This is about healthcare. This is about it not being, yeah, she is ruining everything. But it did change the way my book was perceived. So it kind of brought this thing again where now I'm feeling even more upset because the number of stories I've been reading about people saying when they go to the hospital and they go on the ventilator, they ask, who's going to pay for this? How can my family do this? And it's devastating.
And terrifying in a lot of ways. When you initially want to make your visit to Milwaukee, we were shaping a conversation around just that, the curious and not so curious history of Black and brown bodies and medical experiments. That's the thread of the story. Yeah. And at the same time, there's a project happening nationally where they are inviting Black and brown residents to donate DNA, because the medical trials that have been used to make medication were largely done with the absence of taking into account Black men, in particular, Black and brown humans. So the medical world, research world wants to correct that. So if we have more information, then all the medicine we all can be offered will actually work on more of us. And that makes a whole lot of sense, except remember Tuskegee. Remember the mayor of Las Vegas now wants to use the city as a control group. Remember that? And then your book hits. So it was a lot to kind of ride through. And now to be in Rona, I can just imagine the reception.
Yeah. And I mean, even on two different sides of that, one is the history of gynecology is that J. Marion Sims practiced different surgical procedures on enslaved women. And so most of what we know about gynecology is because without anesthesia, many of our ancestors went through horrific scientific and it's hard for me to even say this is science, but it's still the root of this thing. And the other is as recently as 5 years ago, the World Health Organization called what was happening in Guantanamo Bay a research study, because the only thing it's really teaching us is what torture does to a person's body. And those are all brown people again. And it's so frustrating to see how prevalent you can see the line of it. It's not just one thing in the past, it's still over and over and over again.
Have you had any reactions or conversations that have been hopeful from people that have read the book or research that you've come across?
I think the most hopeful reaction to the book is the number of people who said it made them think. People saying the book made them think. It's a book that I think that if you enjoy the style of it and are engaged with it, you can read it really fast. And I was kind of nervous sometimes that you would read it fast and then not really think about it.
Thinking it was definitely going to take you there.
Yeah.
The cover is beautiful. Is there a story behind how it became the cover?
Not really. It was just kind of the second offer. I'll hold it up too. It was the second try at the cover. And the minute we saw it, we knew it was the one. It's by an artist. Her name is Yulia Bass. And I think the art is called like The Last Icon or something like that.
It's so gorgeous. I love the mystery of it.
Yeah.
How did you balance your anger in writing around specific topics? Did you struggle with finding balance between anger and passion?
I did struggle with that. And I mean, I think one of the hardest things to do as a writer, especially one who cares a lot about the world around them, which I think most writers, that's not true. I think several writers are that way. And I think it's really hard sometimes to balance talking about the world and engaging with something that makes you angry and not ranting about it. There are pages of Lakewood that tipped over the scale of just ranting, and it wasn't telling a story. And I think what saved it is I also could tell a story. I could get involved in the characters and start thinking about them. And I think that it tipped the scales so that I would keep staying focused on them and not just myself.
Excellent. Well, I would like to invite, we're going to crowd our little coffee table, or are we in a bar? We're together, that's for sure. It just happens to look like we're on a screen. I'm going to invite Jeni to join us at our table. Welcome back. Welcome back. So I wanted to, first of all, thank both of you for making time for this conversation. And same as we said with Jeni, thank you, Megan, for, my husband calls them stubborn prayers of being consistent and committed to writing. I have to remind myself every day that I'm a writer, even though I write every day, because it's a lot of layers to this relationship. But I wanted to give you both a chance to chat with each other or pose a question, anything you want to say to the good people. I know we have a couple more questions that are coming in.
I don't have a whole lot to say. If I cut out, I'm sorry. I had an internet problem.
No worries. No worries.
Jeni, where are you in Michigan? You said, but it cut out on mine.
Yeah, I'm actually right outside of Ann Arbor. And you went to U of M? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, and I lived there for a while afterward too. Are you in Saline or Chelsea, or?
I'm outside of Chelsea. Yep.
Okay, so yeah, that's probably a big adjustment.
Yes. Yeah, I lived in Houston for 8 years, in the San Francisco area for 3 years. Now I'm out with the deer.
Yeah. Oh man.
Megan.
And I wanted to ask you, oh, sorry. When were you published in Gulf Coast?
I think it was last year.
Oh, okay. I used to work on Gulf Coast. That would have been cool if it had crossed my path while I was there.
It was when Alex McElroy was fiction editor. So last year or 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So
small world.
Yeah, it's publishing is like, yeah. So how does it feel to have your book out now?
It feels strange. It launched on Tuesday, and I'm supposed to go on book tour and be with Boswell Books and other places, and I don't know. It's just kind of quiet and scary outside. So it's pandemic.
Yeah.
I was peeking backstage to see if anyone else had any other questions. That's how I'm making us remember that we had physical spaces before this digital thing all happened. Megan, before we sign off, I wanted to ask if you had any other digital readings or shows or places where folks can follow your work.
Yeah. So on Sunday, I'm going to be in conversation with Juan Martinez, and it's going to be on Women and Children's First. Facebook page, and you
Okay.
can see it there. I'm going to be, everything's been moved around so much that I'm going to be reading on an Instagram live for a bookstore in Rhode Island. I think it's 20 stories next Saturday. And then I have a reading coming up in May for literati. And I think that's May 7th.
Okay.
But I'm still torn.
Most excellent. So we have your Twitter. So for folks that want to make sure that you are not only following her work, but just her journey out there as a writer and out here in the world, in the land of Rona, doing your digital interviews. And also the same with Jeni McFarland. You can find all of her social media handles at her website as well. And lastly, we want to ask you, if you're going to purchase these books, and you should, please order with Boswell Book Company. We're proud and excited and honored that they partner with us to find all kinds of clever ways to share stories and celebrate writers and here in Milwaukee and out there in the interwebs. Again, I'll say it again out loud. Amazon gonna be just fine. So find a way to order from your local bookstore so we can keep those doors open. Thank you to the Wisconsin Writers Association, to everyone who tuned in to watch. Tell all your people that we have talent that is still out here creating art. You're going to need the artists to get through all of this, good people. Thank you for watching and listening and reading, and we'll see you next time with May I Have a Word. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thanks. Yeah. Oh, wait. A couple more.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Ruth.